Some nights officially never happen. The candles burn down, the storm passes, and by morning you've agreed to forget. But the dark saw everything, and forgetting is the hardest spell of all. We begin our story now. The lift to level 2 had a habit of shuddering between floors, and Hermione Granger had learned to brace for it the way she braced for most things now. Quietly, without showing the brace itself. The grille rattled shut. The disembodied voice announced the Department of Magical Law Enforcement in its bored, brassy tone. And there, already inside, one shoulder against the brass paneling and a folder tucked under his arm, stood the person she least wanted to share a small enclosed space with at 20 to 8 in the morning. Granger. Malfoy. That was the whole of their morning ritual. 2 surnames, traded like coins worn smooth from handling. 3 years of it. She had stopped expecting more and had nearly stopped resenting that she'd stopped. He did not look at her. He looked at the descending numbers as though they owed him something, his jaw set in that particular way she had catalogued without meaning to. The small muscle that ticked when he was holding a sentence behind his teeth. He was always holding something behind his teeth. She had decided long ago it was contempt and left it there, filed, undisturbed, because examining it would have required her to stand closer to him than she was willing to. The lift jolted. Her stack of parchment slid. He caught the topmost sheet before it reached the floor and held it out to her without comment. 2 fingers, the edge of the page trembling very slightly in the recycled air of the shaft. A silver ring caught the lamplight on his hand. She took the parchment by the opposite corner, careful, the way one takes something from a person one does not intend to touch. "Thank you," she said. The grille opened. They walked the corridor to the artifact office in a silence so practiced it had texture, the hollow echo of 2 sets of footfalls finding the same rhythm, and then, as if catching themselves, deliberately breaking it. The office they shared was a long, low room at the dead end of a corridor, lit by enchanted sconces that never quite reached the corners. Shelves climbed every wall, each crowded with confiscated objects, swaddled in suppression cloth. Dark things, raid spoils, the leavings of a war that had ended and somehow never finished ending. The work was meticulous and grim. Catalogue the object, identify the curse, neutralize it, or crate it for the vaults. The Ministry had paired them because Granger's research and Malfoy's family-bred fluency in old magic made them, on paper, the most efficient team in the department. On paper. In the room, they were 2 people who had perfected the art of needing the same workbench without ever occupying it at the same moment. She hung her cloak. He was already at the far table, unrolling a requisition order, the parchment giving its dry, small sound under his hands. The tooth of old vellum, brittle at the corners. She watched the back of his neck and thought, as she did most mornings, that it was remarkable how a person could fill a room with cold without ever raising their voice. "There's a field order," he said, not turning. "For us. I read it last night. Then you'll know we're expected in Wales by noon." Now he did turn, and the lamplight caught the grey of his eyes and made them paler, almost colourless, like the sky before snow. A private vault, 12th century warding, 3 crates of objects too volatile to move, until they've been logged on site. I know what's in the file, Malfoy. Then I needn't tell you the weather report. A beat. Storm front off the Irish Sea. Magical pressure system. The forecasters are using the word unprecedented, which generally means they haven't the faintest idea what it'll do. She kept her expression even. The thing about Draco Malfoy was that he gave you nothing to push against. He stated facts. He waited. He let your own reaction be the only thing in the room, so that any heat that came of a conversation seemed to belong entirely to you. She had learned the trick of him slowly and hated that she'd had to. Then we'll work fast, she said, and be gone before it hits. Something flickered at the corner of his mouth. Not a smile. The ghost of the place a smile might have lived in a different life. You always think you can outrun the weather. I usually can. Yes. He rolled the order shut. That's rather the trouble with you. They apparated to the edge of the wards at 11:30, and the first thing Hermione noticed was the smell. Not the moor, though the moor was there. Wet heather, peat, the iron tang of standing water. Underneath it, threaded through the air like a wire pulled taut, was the scent of ozone, sharp and metallic, the smell that came after a hex split the atmosphere. Except no spell had been cast. It was the storm, still hours off, announcing itself in the charged hairs along her forearms. The manor sat alone in a fold of the hills, slate-roofed and shuttered, the kind of house that had been built to keep something in rather than out. The warding was old. She could feel it the moment they crossed the boundary, a pressure against the skin like deep water, the magic so ancient it had gone half to instinct. Draco's stride checked for half a second as they passed through it. She saw it. She said nothing. He had grown up inside wards like these. Perhaps the body remembered things the mind tried to outrun, and she found, to her irritation, that the thought made her almost gentle for a moment before she put the gentleness away where it belonged. Inside, the vault was as advertised. 3 iron-bound crates, the objects within them humming faintly, a low chord of wrongness that set her teeth on edge. They worked. This, at least, they did well. He read the warding. She logged the structure. She identified the curse signatures. He confirmed them against the genealogies his blood had taught him before he could read. For 3 hours they spoke only in the flat shorthand of the work. Containment intact, secondary hex, log it under coercion class, careful that one bites. And the room filled with the dry rustle of parchment and the small chime of artifacts settling under suppression. It was nearly 4 when the light changed. She felt it before she saw it. A drop in the air, the pressure shifting, the static lifting the fine hairs at her nape. Through the shutters, the sky had gone the colour of a fresh bruise, green-black and swollen, and the first wind hit the house with a sound like a great hand laid flat against the slates. Malfoy. I feel it. He was already on his feet, wand out, watching the sconces. The wards are reacting. Listen. She listened. Under the wind there was a second sound, a thin, rising whine. The warding magic stretched to its limit, the 12th century enchantments groaning as the storm's pressure pressed against them from outside. We should go, she said. Now. Before it... The first surge took the lights. Not flickered, took. Every sconce in the manor died at once. The enchanted flames snuffed as though a fist had closed over each of them, and the dark that dropped was total, the absolute black of a house in the moors at dusk, with the windows shuttered and the sky drowned. She heard Draco swear, soft and precise. She raised her wand. Lumos. Nothing. She said it again, felt for the magic, found it, and felt it slip through her fingers like wet sand, the storm's charge scrambling the spell before it could catch. Beside her, in the dark, she heard him try the same and fail the same, heard the sharp exhale that was as close as Draco Malfoy ever came to fear. "The flu," she said. "Dead. Did you not feel it go? When the wards surged, the network went with them. And before you ask, no, we don't apparate. Not through air this charged. We'd be lucky to arrive in 2 pieces, let alone 1. The wind screamed against the slates. Somewhere above them something tore loose and went tumbling away into the storm. "So, we're trapped," she said. "We're delayed." A pause, the dark thick between them. "There's a difference. The storm will pass. The charge will settle. The wards will heal. Old magic always does. It's the new spells that break. By morning, we'll walk out the way we came." His voice was very even, very controlled, and she understood that the control was the point, that he was holding the room steady the only way he knew how. "Until then, we don't move in the dark in a house full of cursed objects. We find light. We wait." "And how do you propose we find light exactly, when neither of us can manage a lumos?" "Granger." She heard him moving, careful, his hand finding the edge of the workbench, then a drawer, the dry scrape of wood. "The people who built this place lived through times when the magic failed. They'd have kept the old ways close." The drawer opened. Something rolled. Muggle methods, tallow, wax. A small, dry sound, a striking. Once, twice. On the 3rd strike, a flame caught and the dark fell back. It was only a candle stub, only a single struggling point of light. But in the total black of the storm-drowned house, it bloomed enormous, and it threw everything into a trembling gold relief. The crates, the suppression cloth, the climbing shelves, and Draco Malfoy's face, lit from below, the planes of it gone strange and soft and unguarded in a way she had never once seen across the cold neutral ground of their office. He was looking at the flame. Then he was looking at her, and the look held a beat too long, that forbidden extra beat she had spent 3 years not permitting, and she felt the floor of her certainty tilt beneath her without anything in the room having moved at all. "There," he said, and his voice had gone rough at the edge, and he cleared it and tried again. "There's more in the drawer, enough for the night." The wind howled. The candle guttered, recovered, steadied. And in its small, unsteady light, with the storm sealing them in and every familiar role stripped away by the dark, Hermione Granger looked at the boy she had spent 3 years refusing to see, and found that she could no longer remember why she had been so sure she didn't want to. They moved the candle to the center of the long workbench, and the room rearranged itself around that single point of gold. Everything beyond its reach went to shadow. The shelves, the crates, the door that led nowhere now, and what remained inside the light was very small and very close. 2 chairs, a few feet of scarred oak, and the 2 of them suddenly without the architecture of a whole room to keep them apart. Hermione sat first, because standing felt like a position she would have to defend. Draco lit a second stub from the first and set it a careful distance from the originals, the way a person tends a fire they don't quite trust. And then he sat too, across from her, his hands folded on the wood, and the silver ring catching the flame each time he shifted. Outside, the storm had found its full voice. The wind came in long, pressing exhalations against the slates, and beneath it ran a deeper sound, a kind of groaning resonance she felt in her sternum more than heard, the old wards taking the strain, bending, refusing to break. She had read about magic this ancient. She had never sat inside it while it fought for its life. "How long?" she said, "before it settles?" "You keep asking me as though I have a timetable. You said by morning. I said probably by morning." He turned one of the spare candles a quarter turn on the bench, an absent, fastidious gesture, aligning a thing that did not need aligning. "The truthful answer is that I don't know. Nobody knows. The forecasters certainly didn't." A pause. "We're going to be here for hours, Granger. You may as well stop counting them." She wanted to argue. Arguing was the safe ground, the well-worn floor they both knew how to stand on. But the candlelight did something to the impulse, softened it, turned it from a weapon into mere noise, and she found she had no appetite for it. So she said nothing, and the silence that followed was different from their office silence. The office silence was a wall. This one had weather in it. He noticed. Of course he noticed. He noticed everything. It was the most exhausting thing about him. "You're very quiet," he said. "It's unnerving. I keep waiting for the correction." The correction. There's always a correction. Some small thing I've gotten not quite wrong that you can't bear to leave standing. The corner of his mouth moved. Not contempt. Something drier, more tired, almost rueful. 3 years, and you've never once let a mistake of mine go unremarked. I've come to find it almost restful, like a clock that chimes. She looked at him. The flames stood between them, and through the thin warp of heat above it, his face wavered slightly, and she thought, I have never heard him talk like this. Not once. Not in 3 years of crates and requisitions and surnames traded in lifts. The cold he carried had always been so total that she had taken it for the whole of him, the way you take a closed door for a wall. "You make it sound like I enjoy it," she said. "Don't you?" "No." It came out more honest than she'd meant it. "I do it because if I stop..." She stopped. The wind pressed against the house. "If I stop correcting you, I'd have to find something else to do with you, and I haven't the slightest idea what that would be." The admission sat in the gold light between them, larger than she'd intended, and she watched it land on him. Something in his face shifted, a loosening, very slight around the eyes. He looked down at his folded hands. "No," he said quietly. "Neither have I." The candle burned down a half-inch. He lit a fresh one without comment, and the small ceremony of it, the strike, the catch, the careful placing, gave them both somewhere to put their hands and their eyes for a moment. She had begun to understand that he was using the candles the way other people used cigarettes or drink, a thing to do with the body so the mind had cover. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "And you needn't answer. That's never stopped you. When we crossed the wards this afternoon, you faltered, half a step." She watched him. "I've seen you walk into a vault full of objects that would kill a careless man and not break stride. but you slowed at the boundary of a house you'd never been in. Why? He was quiet for long enough that she thought he wouldn't answer, and she had nearly retracted the question, had nearly retreated to the safe ground, when he spoke. It felt like home. His voice was very flat, very controlled, the control held in place by visible effort, the muscle in his jaw ticking once. The warding, it has the same grain to it, the same age. The Manor's wards felt like that under your skin, that particular pressure. He turned the candle a quarter turn it didn't need. I haven't lived there in 3 years. I make a point of not going back. And then I cross a threshold in the middle of Wales, and my body thinks it's 17, and walking into the front hall, and I don't. The muscle ticked again. I don't much care for what my body remembers. She sat very still. She knew what his body remembered because she had been in that front hall on the floor of it, with a name being carved into her arm. The scar lived under her sleeve still. Mud blood. She had a sudden, unbidden, frantic urge to pull the cuff of it straight, to make sure the fabric lay flat over the word, and she pressed her hand to her knee under the table instead and held it there. He saw the movement. Of course he saw it. His gaze dropped to where her arm had been a half-second ago, and his face changed, emptied, then filled with something she had no name for and did not want to name, because naming it would make it real, and a real thing between them was not something she was prepared to hold. Granger. His voice had dropped almost to nothing. I have spent 3 years not saying this because I had no right to the saying of it, and because there was never a moment that wasn't somehow the wrong one, and because you would, quite rightly, have thrown it back in my face. But it is very dark, and we are not at work, and I find Don't. She said it fast, on reflex, the word out before she decided to speak it. Malfoy. Don't. He stopped. The wind filled the gap. You don't have to, she said, more gently than she'd known she could speak to him. I was there. I know what happened. You being sorry doesn't unhappen it, and it isn't your sorry I need, so you can keep it. It's not. She searched the gold air for the word. It's not currency between us. It never was. Then what is? It came out almost desperate, stripped of every defense she'd ever heard him put up. 3 years, Granger. Tell me what's between us, because I have called it a great many things to myself in the dark, and not one of them has fit. The candle guttered. The flame bent nearly flat, recovered, stood. And she did not have an answer, because the only honest answer was the one she had spent 3 years refusing to look at directly, the way one refuses to look at the sun. And now, here it was, sitting across a foot of scarred oak in a house full of storm, looking back at her with grey eyes gone soft and frightened in the light. And she understood that the refusing had cost her something every single day, and she had simply trained herself not to feel the bill. I don't know, she said. It was the truth. I genuinely don't know, but I know it isn't hate. I've been telling myself it was hate for 3 years, and Her own voice betrayed her, roughening. It was never hate. Hate doesn't take this much work. Something had shifted in the room, and they both felt the shift, and neither moved to stop it. The storm pressed. The candles burned. They had drifted, without either of them deciding it, into a conversation neither had ever permitted in the bright, cold light of the ministry, about the war, about the years after, about the particular loneliness of being a person the world had decided it already knew. She told him about the nights she didn't sleep. He told her, haltingly in fragments, about a house he couldn't bear to enter, and parents he couldn't bear to leave alone in it. They were not kind stories, but they were true, and the truth of them was a kind of nakedness, and the longer it went on, the more the air between them thickened. That static she'd felt on the moor, that pull, gathering now not in the sky, but in the foot of candlelit space across the bench. "You're cold," he said. She was. The fire of the wards had not warmed the room, and the storm had dragged the temperature down with it, and she had wrapped her arms about herself without noticing. "Here." He was already shrugging out of his outer robe, half rising. "Take this." "I don't need—" "Granger." He came round the bench. He was standing over her now, the robe held out, and she could smell him, wool and ozone, and something warm beneath, the particular scent of a person. And the candlelight had him from below and made him strange and young and unguarded, and her own breath had gone shallow in a way she could not pretend was the cold. "For once in your life," he said, very low, "stop arguing and let someone do something for you." She let him. He settled the robe about her shoulders, and his hands stayed there a moment longer than the act required. Just a moment, the weight of his palms through the wool, the silver ring cold for an instant against the side of her neck where it brushed. And she felt the whole length of that moment in her spine, every separate second of it, the static gathering to a point. Neither of them breathed. The flame stood very still. She looked up. He was already looking down. The foot of distance was gone. She had not seen it go, and there was only the small charged inch of air left between them, trembling with everything 3 years had not let them say. And his hand had come, without permission, without plan, to rest against the line of her jaw, and his thumb moved once, slow, over her cheekbone, and she did not pull away. "Granger," he breathed, and it was not a surname now. It had stopped being a coin worn smooth. It was the most naked thing she had ever heard him say, her own name made into a question and a confession and a surrender all at once. And in the small gold trembling light, with the storm sealing the world away beyond the shutters and every roll and rule and 3-year refusal burned down to nothing, Hermione Granger closed the last inch herself. The kiss undid something in both of them that neither would afterward be able to name. It was not gentle, and it was not violent. It was the breaking of a dam that had been holding back 3 years of water, and when it broke, there was only the rush. His hand stayed at her jaw, then moved to the back of her neck, into her hair. She rose out of the chair and into him, and the robe slid from her shoulders, and neither of them caught it. The candle on the bench burned alone and unwatched, throwing their joined shadow, huge and trembling, against the climbing shelves, and the storm went on, screaming against the slates, as though it was somewhere very far away, in another country, a thing that had nothing to do with the small gold room, where the only roles left to them were the ones they were inventing in real time, with their hands in the dark. There would be a great deal afterward that Hermione could not have set down in words, even had she been ordered to. and the catalogue of the night was the one document she would never permit herself to write. But there were fragments that lodged in her and would not be dislodged. The discovery that his hands, which she had only ever seen handle cursed objects with cold precision, could be unbearably careful. The sound he made low in his chest when she pressed her palm flat over his heart and felt how hard it was going, as hard as her own. The way he said her name, her actual name, more than once, as if he had been saving it, as if he were paying out something he'd hoarded for years and could not spend fast enough now that he'd begun. The candlelight on the pale line of his shoulder, the cold storm air against her skin, and the warmth of him against it, the two temperatures meeting along the length of her, and the strange completeness of it, the sense, terrifying, undeniable, of a thing clicking into a place she had not known was empty. It was not tender, exactly. Tenderness implied safety, and there was no safety in it. They both knew, even in the thick of it, that they were doing something they would have to account for. But there was a fierce attentiveness in him that she had not braced for, a refusal to look away, an insistence on watching her face as though her face were the only text in the world worth reading. And she found, to her own undoing, that she could not look away either. They came together in the gold light, watching each other the whole time, and that, the watching, the unbroken seeing, was somehow more intimate than anything their bodies did, and it was the thing she would lie awake remembering long after she had ordered herself to forget the rest. The candle burned down. He lit another without breaking from her. The storm wore itself toward exhaustion in the hours past midnight, and at some point they slept, tangled and uncovered on the hard floor with his outer robe pulled over them both, her head on the warm hollow beneath his collarbone, his hand spread flat and protective across the small of her back. And for a few hours, in the dead heart of the storm, in a house full of cursed objects at the end of nowhere, two people who had spent 3 years being cold to each other were, against all sense and history, entirely warm. She woke before he did, and she woke knowing. It was the particular grey of the light that told her. The storm had broken sometime near dawn, and a thin watery brightness was leaking through the slats of the shutters, the colour of skimmed milk, the colour of consequences. The candles had all guttered out. The room had its furniture back, its shelves, its crates, its hard everyday edges. And the magic had returned. She could feel it the moment she reached for it, the spell catching clean and quick, where last night it had slipped through her fingers like sand. The wards had healed. The flu would be live. By the time the ministry expected their report, they could be gone, and clean, and back behind their separate walls. She lay very still and looked at the rafters and felt the whole architecture of her life reassembling itself around her. Hermione Granger, sensible, careful, the woman who did not make mistakes she couldn't afford. And the architecture had a Draco Malfoy-shaped hole in it now, warm against her side, his breath stirring her hair. And she understood with a cold clarity that she had perhaps 1 minute, perhaps 2, before he woke, in which to decide what kind of person she was going to be about this. She thought about the scar under her sleeve. She thought about the front hall of his house and the floor of it, and the word. She thought about every reason she had spent 3 years assembling, that he was who he was, that she was who she was, that the war was a thing you did not simply set down because a storm had made you forget for a night that you were carrying it. She thought, this is not a thing that can survive daylight. She thought, whatever happened by candlelight was real, and it cannot be allowed to be real, because a real thing between us is a thing the world would devour, and I have already been devoured once, and I will not do it again. And so, when he stirred, when his hand tightened on her back, and his breathing changed, and she felt him surface into wakefulness, and into the same grey knowing she'd woken to, she was already sitting up, already reaching for her cloak, already, with hands that she kept very steady through sheer force of will, putting the architecture back. Granger. She didn't look at him. She couldn't. If she looked at him, she would not be able to do the thing she had decided to do. The storm's past, she said. Her voice came out level, almost brisk, the office voice, the wall voice. The wards have healed. Weaken flew from the front hall. The network should be live again. We've a report due at the ministry by 10, and we're behind on the inventory as it is. A silence. She felt it behind her, felt him take in the cloak in her hands, and the set of her shoulders, and the careful neutrality she had built across her own face in the space of 90 seconds. Hermione! It was the name, this time, the naked one. And it nearly broke her, the soft, frightened question in it, the same question he'd breathed into the inch of air last night. What is this? Tell me what this is. But she had already decided. It's Granger, she said quietly. At work, it's always been Granger. She heard him understand. She heard it in the small sound he didn't quite make, in the rustle of him sitting up, in the long beat in which he said nothing at all. When she finally made herself turn, he had his face back on, the cold one, the closed door one, the wall she had mistaken for the whole of him for 3 years, and which she now knew, with awful certainty, to be a thing he put on the way she put on her own. His eyes were the only thing that gave him away. They were not cold at all. They were doing something she could not bear to watch, and so she looked away from them and reached for her professionalism the way a drowning person reaches for wood. Right, he said. And his voice was the office voice too, flat and even, and stripped of everything the night had had in it. Of course, the report. A pause. The muscle ticked in his jaw once. Granger. So that was the treaty then. Made without a single clause spoken aloud, signed in the grey light by 2 people who could not look at each other. It never happened. Whatever the candles had seen, the candles were out. There was no record. There would be no record. They would walk out into the healed morning and back into their separate cold, and they would never, ever speak of it. And the not speaking would be the price they paid for being allowed to go on standing in the same small room. She believed that morning that it would work. She believed pretending was a thing she was good at. She had pretended for 3 years that the cold between them was the whole truth after all, and she had been so very convincing that she'd half believed it herself. What she had not reckoned on What neither of them had reckoned on, gathering their things in the milk-grey light, not touching, not looking, performing the small, careful choreography of two colleagues who had merely waited out a storm, was that the night had not made them strangers who happened to know a secret. It had made them something far more dangerous. It had let each of them see, just once, exactly what was behind the other's wall. And a person who has seen behind the wall can never again be entirely convinced by the wall. They could rebuild the cold. They could trade surnames in lifts and hand each other parchment by the corners, and never once let a look hold past the permitted beat. But underneath all of it, in both of them, the knowledge would sit and hum like a suppressed artifact under its cloth. Quiet, contained, and absolutely impossible to forget was there. They flewed back separately. He insisted, with a courtesy so glacial it was almost cruel, that she go first. She stepped into the green flame without looking back, and arrived in the ministry atrium into the ordinary roar of a Tuesday morning. The fountain splashing, the lifts chiming, 1,000 people who had slept in their own beds moving past her with their own ordinary lives intact. She stood for a moment in the middle of it, in yesterday's clothes, with the ghost of his outer robe's wool and ozone scent still on her skin, and she pressed the cuff of her sleeve flat over the scar on her arm, smoothing fabric that was already perfectly smooth, again and again, until her breathing steadied. By the time the second flue flared green behind her and Draco Malfoy stepped out, immaculate, remote, his face arranged into the precise expression of a man who had spent a tedious night working overtime in Wales. She had her own face arranged to match. They did not acknowledge each other across the atrium. They rode separate lifts. And when they met, 20 minutes later, in the long, low office at the dead end of the corridor, both freshly changed, both armoured, both performing for an audience of no one but each other, it was Hermione who spoke first, because someone had to, because the silence had gone unbearable. "The Welsh inventory," she said, not looking up from the parchment she was very deliberately reading. "We logged through the second crate. We'll need to file the report and schedule a return for the third." And Draco Malfoy, standing in the doorway with the grey morning at his back, looked at her bent head for one beat too long. That forbidden extra beat, the one neither of them was ever again going to be able to keep themselves from taking. And then he stepped into the room and pulled the cold around himself like a cloak and said, in a voice with absolutely nothing in it, "Yes, of course." The report, and reached past her for the inventory ledger, and his hand and her hand were on the same page at the same moment, and they both went very still. They both went very still, and the stillness was the loudest thing in the room. His hand lay flat on the left page of the open ledger. Hers lay flat on the right. Between their two hands ran the gutter of the binding, a half-inch of shadowed paper, and across that half-inch passed a current so unmistakable that Hermione thought, absurdly, that the parchment might char beneath them. Neither hand moved. Neither hand withdrew. To withdraw would be to admit that there was something to withdraw from, and the entire treaty rested on the fiction that there was not. "You take the left," she said. Her voice did not shake. She had spent the lift ride making certain it would not shake. I'll cross-reference the curse signatures against the Black Family Registry. You read better than I do off the original warding hand. Do I? It was flat. Not a question. He lifted his hand from the page, slowly, deliberately, the way one lifts a hand from a wound to check whether it has stopped bleeding. And the absence of his palm beside hers left a cold patch on the paper, and she was furious to discover a cold patch somewhere under her ribs. Right, the left. He carried the ledger to the far table. The whole length of the room reasserted itself between them, all those careful feet of distance they had spent 3 years engineering, and she breathed again and bent over the registry and read the same line 4 times without taking in a word of it. This was how it would be then. She understood that now. She had imagined in the grey dawn that the treaty would feel like a wall going back up. Solid, final, a relief. She had not anticipated that it would feel like this, like trying to ignore a struck bell while standing inside it, the tone going on and on through the bones of her, inaudible to everyone in the world but the 2 people it was ringing for. The morning ground forward. They worked. They were, if anything, more efficient than usual, because efficiency required no eye contact and gave the hands and the mind something honest to do. She catalogued. He read the warding hand aloud in the flat, clipped tone he reserved for the work, and she transcribed, and not once did either of them say anything that was not strictly necessary to the inventory, and the not saying built up in the room like pressure in a sealed vessel. It was the small things that betrayed them. It was always going to be the small things. When she passed him the quill, he reached for it, and their fingers did not touch. He was careful now, terribly careful. He angled his hand so that there was a clear margin of air between his skin and hers. And the carefulness itself was a confession, because you do not engineer that much space between yourself and a person you are indifferent to. When he set a logged artifact back on its shelf, he did it on the far side of the room every time, choosing the longest route past her chair rather than the short one. And she catalogued each detour without meaning to, the way she catalogued everything, and the catalogue grew, and every entry in it said the same thing. He is as ruined by this as you are. At 11, a memo came folded into a paper crane and beat its wings against the window until she let it in. It was from Department Head Robards. The Welsh return was scheduled for Thursday, and, she read it twice, given the volatility of the 3rd crate, the assignment was to remain a paired posting. Granger and Malfoy, together. Another field day, another remote house, possibly, another vault, certainly hours of close work in enclosed spaces, with no one to perform the cold for but each other. She set the memo down. Across the room she heard him still, heard the small cessation of the rustle of parchment that meant he was reading the same words over her shoulder through the bond of the shared posting, that his copy of the memo had arrived on his side of the room at the same instant. Thursday, he said. Flat. Thursday, she agreed. A silence. The water pipes ticked in the wall. Somewhere down the corridor a lift chimed, and a person laughed at something, an ordinary sound from an ordinary life, and it reached them in the long, low room like a sound from the far side of glass. Granger. He had not turned round. She could see only the back of him, the set of his shoulders, the pale hair catching the grey light from the window. "We are going to have to be in a vault together for the better part of a day. I'm aware of the geography of the assignment, Malfoy. That isn't what I—" He stopped. The muscle, she knew without seeing it, had gone tight in his jaw. When he spoke again, it was with the enormous care of a man walking on a frozen lake, testing each word for the crack. "I am simply observing that it would be easier for both of us if we agreed in advance to conduct ourselves as professionals." The word landed like a slap, and she understood it was meant to. Professionals. As though the night had been an unprofessional lapse. As though it could be filed under conduct unbecoming and corrected by a stern memo to oneself. She felt the heat go up the back of her neck, and she gripped the edge of the table until her knuckles whitened. Describe the whitening of the knuckles, some cold cataloguing part of her noted, and she nearly laughed, because here she was, doing the very thing, her body broadcasting the fury her mouth would not. "I have been nothing but professional," she said, and the brittleness of it was audible even to her. "I'm not the one taking the long way round the room to avoid a chair." The silence that followed was a different texture. She had broken a rule. She had acknowledged the small things, dragged one of them up into the light, and the moment it was spoken, it could not be unspoken, and they both knew it. He turned round. He looked at her across the length of the office, and for a moment, one moment before he could stop it, his face was not cold at all. It was the candlelit face, the naked one, the one she'd seen across a foot of scarred oak. And in it, she read, plain as printed text, the thing he had been holding behind his teeth all morning. "Do you think I want to take the long way? Do you think any part of this is a choice?" Then the cold came down again, on purpose, with visible effort, like a portcullis lowered by a man hauling on a chain. "You're right," he said, quiet. "I'll use the short way. It was idiotic of me to think the route I take across a room would go unremarked by you. Nothing goes unremarked by you. It's a clock that chimes. A beat. I find I don't mind it as much as I used to." And he crossed the room, the short way, straight past her chair, close enough that the hem of his robe stirred the air at her shoulder, and she caught it again, faint beneath the ozone and old parchment smell of the office, that warm undernote that was only him. And he set the artifact on the near shelf with a small, precise click, and stood there a half-second longer than the act required, close behind her, both of them facing the shelf, neither of them turning, the back of her chair the only thing between his knees and her spine. She did not move. She could not have said in that half-second whether she was holding herself still to keep from leaning back into him or to keep from bolting from the room, and the fact that she could not tell the two impulses apart frightened her more than either of them alone. "Granger," he said again, low, just above her, and there was a question forming in it, the question, the one from the candlelight, the one she had refused in the grey dawn. The door banged open. "Granger! Malfoy! There you are!" It was Dawlish from 2 doors down, oblivious, ledger in hand, sailing into the long, low room on a tide of ordinary ministry chatter, and Draco straightened and stepped back, and the cold slammed down so fast and so complete that Hermione felt the temperature of the air change. Robards wants the Welsh prelim by end of day, and there's a query come up from the Wizengamot on the coercion class objects. They're asking whether... Oh, am I interrupting? No, they said, together, instantly, too fast. Dawlish looked from one of them to the other, and a small puzzled crease appeared between his brows, and Hermione watched the thought begin to form behind his ordinary face. That was strange, the two of them, the way they, and then watched it dissolve, because the thing the two of them might be was so far outside the realm of the imaginable that Dawlish's mind simply declined to hold it, and he shrugged and held out the ledger, and the moment closed over like water over a stone. "The coercion class query," Hermione said, taking it, her voice immaculate, her face immaculate, every system back online and humming. "Yes, I drafted the containment protocols last week. I'll have an answer to the Wizengamot by 3. "Brilliant. You're a marvel, Granger." Dawlish grinned, easy, and clapped Draco on the shoulder on his way out. Draco, who held himself rigid under the friendly hand as though it were a blade, and called over his shoulder, "Glad the two of you didn't kill each other in Wales. Robards had a bet on," and was gone, the door swinging shut behind him, and the ordinary world he'd let in went out again with him, and the long, low room was sealed once more around the two of them, and the thing that hummed under its cloth between them. They did not speak for a long time after that. They worked. The afternoon greyed toward evening at the high window. She answered the Wizengamot query in faultless, frigid prose, and he logged the second crate's remaining contents in the warding hand, and the silence rebuilt itself. But it was not the old wall silence, and it was never going to be the old wall silence again. It was full now. It had the night in it. Every minute of not speaking was a minute spent listening to the bell. At 6:30, she stood and gathered her things and put on her cloak, and he looked up from the ledger, and across the long room their eyes met and held. Past the beat, well past it, neither of them willing to be the one who looked away first, the way they had watched each other in the candlelight, unbroken, naked, the only honesty either of them seemed able to manage being this wordless refusal to stop seeing. "Thursday," he said finally. It was not flat this time. He had stopped being able to make it flat. "Thursday," she said, and her voice was not flat either. She left him there in the greying light with the ledger open and the artifacts humming under their cloth. And she walked the corridor to the lift alone and pressed the cuff of her sleeve flat over the scar that did not need flattening, and rode down through the chiming floors with her own pulse loud in her ears, and understood, fully, finally, with no architecture left to hide it behind, that the treaty was already failing, that the pretending had not made the thing smaller, but had pressurized it, packed it tighter, and that on Thursday they would be alone in a vault at the end of nowhere with 2 days' worth of everything they had not said, and that she was not, despite 3 years of evidence to the contrary, anything like as good at lying to herself as she had believed. Thursday came the way dreaded things always come, not slowly, the way one hopes, giving room to prepare, but all at once, as though Wednesday had simply been a thin partition that gave way. The vault this time was beneath a derelict townhouse in a forgotten corner of Bristol, 3 stories underground, reached by a spiral stair that wound down through stone, so old the steps had worn to shallow troughs in their centres. The Ministry had sealed the place after a raid 2 years prior, and the air down there had the cellar cold of long disuse, the smell of damp stone and iron, and, beneath it, the faint, persistent ozone tang of contained dark magic. The smell that, she now understood, she would never again be able to breathe without thinking of him. They worked the way they had learned to work since Tuesday, with a courtesy so polished it could have cut glass, in the flat shorthand of the inventory, never touching, the careful margin of air always engineered between his hand and hers. The third crate was the worst of the lot. Coercion-class objects, things designed to bend a will, each one humming its low chord of wrongness under the suppression cloth. And the work demanded total concentration, which was, Hermione thought, the single mercy of the day. When she was reading a curse signature, she could not also be aware of the warmth of him 3 feet away. The work was a wall she could stand behind. She stood behind it gratefully for hours. It was the lamp that broke them. They had brought Ministry-issue lanterns, charmed flames in glass housings, proof against the kind of magical interference that had stranded them in Wales. And at some point in the late afternoon, she would never be sure of the hour. There was no daylight 3 stories down to mark it by. Draco reached across the work table for the lantern to bring its light closer to a sigil he was deciphering, and she reached at the same moment for the same lantern for the same reason. And this time, neither of them had engineered the margin, because both of them had been looking at the sigil and not at each other, and his hand closed over hers on the warm glass housing. Neither let go. It was nothing like the night. The night had been a dam breaking, all rush and dark and fever. This was the opposite of rush. This was one hand resting over another hand on the warm curve of a lantern in a cold stone room 3 stories underground. And it was, somehow, worse. More, not less. Because there was no storm to blame it on. No candlelight to make it strange and separate from real life. No dark to hide in. There was only the steady, charmed flame, and the 2 of them in its plain, unflattering light, fully themselves, fully sober, fully aware, and his hand was warm over hers, and neither of them was pretending, in that one suspended moment, that it was an accident. She looked up. He was already looking down. The lantern lit them both fairly this time. No kindness of shadow, every line of his face plain, and she saw that he was breathing as carefully as she was, that the rigid control she had taken for coldness for 3 years was costing him something visible, that the wall he kept hauling up between them was a wall he was holding up by main strength, and that his arms were tired. Granger. His voice had gone rough, not the office voice, the other one. I can't keep doing this. She did not pretend to misunderstand. There was no point with his hand warm over hers and the truth sitting plainly in the lantern light between them. We agreed, she said. The words came out thin. We agreed it never happened. I know what we agreed. His thumb moved once over the back of her hand, the smallest motion, barely a motion at all, and it went through her like the strike of a clock. I have honoured it. I have taken the long way round, and then the short way round, and then no way at all. I have engineered more empty air between your hand and mine than there is in the whole of this vault. I have said professional to you as though it were a thing I believed. And Granger, the muscle in his jaw worked. It is not working. It was never going to work. You can pretend a thing didn't happen. You cannot pretend you don't know what you know. And what do you know? It came out as a challenge. Hard. Because hard was the only register left to her that wasn't surrender. Tell me what you think you know, Malfoy. I know that you woke before me on Tuesday. His grey eyes did not leave her face. I know that you had your cloak in your hands and your wall back up before I'd even opened my eyes, because it was easier to decide alone, in the dark, than to look at me and decide. I know you called me Malfoy at work, because if you'd called me by my name, you'd have had to mean it. And I know. His voice dropped and roughened further, and the next words came out as though he were paying out something it cost him blood to spend. I know that you weren't pretending that night. You can lie to Robards and Dawlish, and the entire Wizengamot, Granger and I will help you do it. I will lie alongside you for the rest of my life, if that's what you ask of me. But you were not pretending in that room, and neither was I. And I am so tired of acting as though the truest thing that has happened to me in 3 years is a thing I have to be ashamed of. The lantern flame stood steady between their joined hands. She should have pulled away. Every architecture in her was screaming for it. Pull away, rebuild, say Malfoy in the cold, flat voice, and watch the portcullis come down over his face and feel the relief of the wall going back up. She knew exactly how to do it. She had 3 years of practice. It would take her 90 seconds the way it had on Tuesday. Instead, she heard herself say very quietly, "I'm not ashamed of it." His breath caught. She felt it more than heard it, felt the small hitch travel down his arm into the hand that lay over hers. "I'm afraid of it," she said, and saying it aloud cracked something open in her chest, some sealed thing she had been carrying under its own suppression cloth since the grey dawn. There's a difference, and you of all people should know it. Shame is when you've done something wrong. Fear is when you've done something true, and you can see exactly what it's going to cost. I'm not ashamed, Draco. I'm terrified. Do you understand? I have spent 3 years building a life I can survive, and it is small, and it is cold, and it is safe, and you are none of those things. You have never once been safe, and that night you made me forget for a few hours that I needed to be. And then morning came, and I remembered, and I have never been so frightened in my life as I was lying on that floor knowing that I didn't want to get up. The name had slipped out, Draco, and they both heard it, and it lay in the cold stone air between them like a struck match, the first time at work, the first time in plain light, and it changed everything, the way a single word can. His hand turned. Beneath hers, on the warm glass, his hand turned over so that their palms met, fingers loosely threading, and it was such a small thing, and it undid her so completely that she had to look away from his face, down at their 2 hands joined on the lantern, his pale and ringed and hers darker and ink-stained, fitted together as though the fitting were the most natural fact in the world. "Then let me be the frightening thing," he said, low, fierce. "Let me be the unsafe thing. I am not asking you to forget what I was, Hermione. God knows I can't forget it myself. I carry that house in Wiltshire around with me every hour I'm awake and most of the ones I'm asleep. I am asking you to look at what I am, which is a man who has not had a single morning in 3 years where his first thought wasn't you, and who has spent the whole of this week learning that there is no amount of empty air I can engineer between us that will make the wanting stop. His grip tightened. Be afraid. I'm afraid too. I have been afraid of you since I was 12 years old, and you outscored me in every subject and looked through me like I was glass. Be afraid with me. It's the only thing I've found that's worse alone. The lantern flame guttered in some draught from the spiral stair and steadied again. And Hermione Granger, 3 stories underground in a cold stone vault, with her hand laced into the hand of Draco Malfoy, and the architecture of 3 careful years coming down around her like the worn troughs of those ancient steps, felt the fear and the wanting standing in her at exactly the same height, neither one winning, and understood that this was the thing the night had given her, and the thing the treaty could never take back, not the memory of what they'd done, but the knowledge of what they were. 2 people who had each seen behind the other's wall, 2 people who could not now ever again be convinced by the wall. This is impossible, she whispered. But she did not pull her hand away. Do you understand that? You and I. It's impossible. The papers, the ministry, your parents, my friends, the history of it. There is no version of this that the world doesn't tear to pieces the moment it learns the thing exists. Then we don't tell the world. His thumb moved over her knuckles, slow, certain. Not yet. Not until we're sure of the thing ourselves. We have spent a week proving we can keep a secret, Granger. We're rather good at it. Let it be ours for a while before it's anyone else's to ruin. A secret. She looked up at him. The lantern lit his face plainly, no shadow to soften it, and she found she no longer wanted the shadow. You do that. Sneak, hide. After everything, you'd want me badly enough to have me only in the dark. Something crossed his face then. Not the cold, not the candle-lit nakedness either, but a third thing, fiercer and steadier than both. And she realized she was watching him decide something, watching him spend a courage she had not known he had. No, he said, that's the trouble. I find I don't want you in the dark at all. I've had you in the dark, and it was the best night of my life, and it has very nearly destroyed me, because the dark is exactly the place where a thing can be made to never have happened. He drew a breath. His hand was steady around hers, but she could feel the pulse going hard in his wrist, where it pressed against hers, hammering, betraying every ounce of the calm in his voice. I don't want a candlelit secret, Hermione. I had one of those, and I gave it back at dawn because you asked me to, and it was the worst thing I have ever done sober. I want... He stopped. The words seemed to cost him everything. I want you in plain light, at work, in the lift, in front of Dawlish and Robards and the whole sneering world. I want to be allowed to say your name and mean it. That's what I want, and I have no right to want it, and I am asking anyway, because I am done pretending that not asking has ever once kept either of us safe. And he lifted their joined hands from the warm glass of the lantern, slowly, watching her face the whole time. For the moment she would pull away, and she did not pull away. And in the plain, steady light of the charmed flame, 3 stories underground, with no storm and no candle and no dark to blame it on, he raised her ink-stained hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles, once with his eyes open and fixed on hers, and she felt the warmth of it travel the whole length of her arm and straight into the sealed and frightened center of her. And she heard herself make a small sound that was not a word, and her free hand rose of its own accord toward the side of his face. Her free hand rose toward the side of his face and stopped, hovering in the cold air between them, half an inch from his cheek. She felt him hold himself absolutely still beneath that half inch, the way one holds still for a bird that has not yet decided to land. The lantern flame burned steady. His knuckles were still warm against her mouth, where she had not yet released them, and his eyes had not left hers, and the whole of the cold stone vault seemed to have shrunk to the small charged distance her palm refused to cross. "If I do this," she said, and her voice came out unsteady, stripped, nothing left in it to hide behind. "I don't know how to undo it. That's the thing you have to understand. I am very good at undoing things. I undid us at dawn in 90 seconds, and I have spent 4 days putting myself back together from it, badly, with the wrong pieces. But this..." Her hand trembled in the air. "If I touch you now, on purpose, in the light, knowing exactly what I'm doing, and choosing to do it anyway, I won't be able to call it a storm or a candle or a thing that never happened. It'll be mine. I'll have chosen it, and I don't know how to take a thing back once I've chosen it." "Then don't take it back." He said it very low. He did not move to close the half inch for her. She understood, with a rush of something that was almost grief, that he would not. That after the dawn in Wales, he had decided, somewhere in the long week, that he would never again be the one to choose for her. That whatever happened between them now had to be a thing her own hand reached out and took. "I'm not asking you for forever, Hermione. I'm not even asking you for tomorrow. I'm asking you for this. The thing in front of us, in the light, with both of us awake. That's all. One choice. You can make the next one later." The flame guttered. Somewhere far above them, up the worn spiral of the stair, the derelict house settled on its old bones with a long groaning creak, and the sound of it, the hollow echo of an empty building shifting in the dark, was so like the groan of the wards in Wales that for a moment she was back there, on the floor, in the gold light, in the one stretch of hours in 3 years when she had been entirely warm. She closed the half inch. Her palms settled against the side of his face, and he turned into it, eyes falling shut at last, his breath leaving him in a long, unsteady exhalation, as though he had been holding it not for a moment, but for days, for the whole of the week, for 3 years. And she felt the faint rasp of him against her hand, and the warmth, and the small, helpless movement of his jaw as he pressed into her touch, like a man who had been cold so long he'd forgotten what warmth felt like until it was given back to him. The silver ring on his hand was still laced through her fingers below. Neither of them had let go of that. "Look at me," she said. He opened his eyes, and she kissed him, herself, deliberately in the plain, steady lantern light, 3 stories underground, with no storm and no candle, and no dark to take the blame. Her hand on his face, and his hand in her hair, and the lantern burning between them on the cold stone table. It was nothing like the first time. The first time had been a dam giving way. This was a thing built rather than broken, slow and certain and chosen, her mouth on his and his answering hers with a kind of disbelieving care, as though he could not quite credit that this was happening in the light, that she had reached out across the half-inch and taken it on purpose, that he was permitted. He made a sound low in his chest, the same sound from the night, and it undid her exactly as it had undone her then, and she pressed closer, and the lantern flame stood steady and gold, and witnessed the whole of it, and this time there would be no dawn to make it a thing that never happened, because they had done it awake, in the light, with their eyes open, and a thing done that way cannot be filed under nothing. When they broke apart, they did not go far. His forehead came down to rest against hers, and they stood there breathing each other's breath over the warm glass of the lantern, and for a long moment neither of them spoke, because there was nothing in the language equal to it, and they both knew better than to try. "All right," she said finally against his mouth, half a laugh and half something perilously close to tears. "All right. That's the choice made then. God help us both." "He won't," Draco murmured, and she felt him smile, actually smile, the first true unguarded smile she had ever seen on him, transforming his whole face, and the sight of it did something to her chest that she had no architecture left to defend against. Gods never once helped a Malfoy. We'll have to manage on our own. They did not, in the end, finish the third crate that day. They worked another hour, badly, both of them useless, both of them grinning at the parchment like fools, and reaching for the same quill on purpose now, and letting their fingers touch on purpose now. The whole careful engineering of empty air abandoned, the margin closed. It was absurd. It was dangerous. They were 3 stories underground with a crate of objects designed to bend a will, and neither of them was concentrating on anything but the other. And at last, Hermione, laughing, capped the inkwell and declared the inventory officially suspended on grounds of gross incompetence, and they sealed the vault and climbed the worn spiral stair into the early Bristol evening, out of the cellar cold into ordinary autumn air, and stood blinking in the grey daylight like 2 people surfacing from very deep water. "We can't tell anyone," she said. They were standing in the mouth of the alley behind the derelict house, just out of sight of the street, and the practical part of her had begun inevitably to reassemble itself. But it was a different architecture now, she noticed, one with him built into it rather than walled out. "Not yet. You were right about that. Not because I'm ashamed. I'm not. I meant that. But because it's ours, and the moment it's theirs, they'll have opinions, and the opinions will be loud, and I'd like to be sure of the thing in the quiet before I have to defend it in the noise." Agreed. He had his hands in his pockets, and the grey light made his hair almost silver, and he was looking at her with an expression she was going to have to learn an entirely new vocabulary to describe. Quiet first, noise later, and Hermione. The smile faded into something more serious. "When the noise comes, and it will come, I won't hide you. Do you understand the difference? We keep it quiet because it's new and ours and fragile, not because I'm ever, for 1 second, going to pretend in front of anyone that I'm not." He stopped, as though the word was still too large to say in daylight. "That I don't want exactly this. The day someone asks me directly, I'll tell them the truth. I won't take the long way round a room to protect anyone's comfort, not even mine. Not even mine. Especially not yours. He said it gently. You've spent 3 years protecting your own comfort by calling a thing hate that was never hate. I'm not going to help you keep doing it. Quiet, yes. Lies, no. There's a difference, and you taught it to me yourself, an hour ago, underground. She looked at him for a long moment in the grey alley light, and then she stepped in and kissed him once more, quick and certain, in the open air where anyone might have come around the corner and seen. A small, reckless thing, a flag planted, and stepped back and said, Thursday's officially over. The vault can wait till Monday. Go home, Malfoy. It's Draco, he said. After what just happened underground, I think you can manage Draco. Go home, Draco. And the sound of his own name in her mouth, in the plain grey daylight, on purpose, with no storm to blame. She watched it land on him exactly as his had landed on her in the vault, watched it go through him like the strike of a clock, and he laughed, low and disbelieving and young, and disapparated with a smile still on his face. But the noise, as he had promised, was coming. It came sooner than either of them had planned for, and it came from a direction neither had thought to guard. On Monday morning, Hermione arrived at the long, low office to find Draco already there, early as always, and a third person standing between them, a person whose presence in the artifact office had no innocent explanation. A person whose ordinary face was arranged into something very far from ordinary. It was Dawlish. And he was holding the Welsh Field Report, the one she had filed Tuesday, the perfunctory one, the one that recorded a tedious night of overtime and said nothing of candles. And his ordinary brow was creased with a question that had clearly been growing in him since the day he'd walked in on the two of them frozen over a shelf. A question his mind had declined to hold then, and had, evidently, over the intervening days, decided to hold after all. There's a discrepancy in the timeline, Dawlish said, and his voice was not unfriendly, but it was careful. The voice of a man who has noticed something and is giving the people he's noticed it about one chance to explain it before he takes it upstairs. The wards in Wales failed at 1600. The network came back at 0600. That's 14 hours, the two of you sealed in a single room, and the report accounts for... He turned a page. 2 crates of inventory that ought to have taken 4 hours at most. He looked up. He looked from Hermione to Draco and back again, and the question in his ordinary face had sharpened to a point. So, I have to ask, and I'd rather ask the two of you quietly here than have Robards ask it loudly upstairs. What exactly happened in that room for the other 10 hours? The office went very still. The artifacts hummed under their cloth, and Hermione felt the whole of the quiet they had so carefully built around the new and fragile thing begin to crack along a fault line she had never thought to brace for. And she turned, without meaning to look at Draco, and found him already looking at her, his face doing the thing it had done in the vault, asking her the question with his eyes, the only question that mattered now. Quiet or true? Quiet or true? The question hung in the still air of the office, passed silently between them over the top of Dawlish's ordinary, expectant face. And Hermione understood that whatever she said in the next 5 seconds would set the terms of everything that came after. She could lie. She was good at lying. She had 4 days of recent practice and 3 years of older. She could say the wards had scrambled their spells, and they'd spent the lost hours rewarding the crates by hand, slow work, dangerous in the dark, and Dawlish would believe it because it was plausible and because the alternative was unthinkable, and the quiet would hold, and the fragile new thing would stay theirs a while longer. And she watched Draco watch her decide, and she saw, clear as printed text, that he would follow her lead either way, that he had meant what he'd said in the alley. "I'll lie alongside you for the rest of my life, if that's what you ask of me." The choice was hers. He had made it hers. He stood there with his hands very still at his sides, and the muscle ticking once in his jaw, and his whole future hanging on which word came out of her mouth. And he did not move to take the choice from her, even now, even when a lie would have been so much safer for them both. It was that, his stillness, his refusal to choose for her, even when choosing wrong would cost him everything, that decided it. "Nothing that affects the inventory," Hermione said. Her voice was perfectly level. "The crates are logged correctly. The timeline discrepancy is real, and I'll amend the report to account for it, because you're right, the original was incomplete." She held Dawlish's gaze. "But the missing hours aren't a security matter, John. They're a personal one. And I'd ask you, as a colleague, and I'd hoped a friend, not to take a personal matter upstairs to Robards as though it were a breach." Dawlish blinked. Whatever he had braced for, a cover-up, a mishandled artifact, a genuine breach he'd have to report, it had not been this. His careful expression faltered into ordinary confusion, and then, slowly, as his eyes went once more from Hermione's level face to Draco's rigid stillness and back into something like dawning, appalled comprehension. "Personal," he repeated. "Personal," she said. "You and—" He could not seem to finish it. He gestured helplessly at Draco, at the whole improbable fact of him. Malfoy? And here was the moment. Here was the noise, arriving early and from the wrong direction, exactly as he'd promised. Hermione opened her mouth, and Draco spoke first. "Yes," he said, quietly, clearly, with no qualification and no shame and no long way round. "Me." He had stepped forward, almost without seeming to, so that he stood not across the room from her now, but beside her, the careful, engineered distance abandoned in front of a witness for the first time, and the simple fact of where he was standing said more than the word had. "Whatever you think you're going to say about it, Dawlish, and I imagine it's a great deal, and most of it fair, say it to me and not to her. She spent 3 years being the most decent person in this building, and I've spent them being the one nobody could quite believe they had to work beside. If there's a reputation to be ruined here, it's mine, and it was ruined long before Wales. Leave hers out of it." The office was silent. Somewhere in the wall the pipes ticked. Dawlish looked at him for a long moment, at Draco Malfoy, standing close beside Hermione Granger, defending her with a fierceness that was entirely without precedent in 3 years of cold surnames traded in lifts. And something shifted in the ordinary man's face. Not approval, exactly, Not even quite acceptance, but a kind of recalibration, the look of a person revising a thing he'd thought he understood. I wasn't going to ruin anyone, Dawlish said slowly. I came down here because the timeline didn't add up, and I'd rather catch a small thing quiet than have a big thing land loud. That's all. He set the report down on the work table, carefully between them. Amend the report. Account for the hours however you like. Rewarding by hand. That'll do. Nobody'll question it. He picked up his own ledger and turned for the door, and paused there, one hand on the frame, and looked back at them with an expression Hermione could not entirely read. "For what it's worth," he said. "Robards had a bet that you two would kill each other in Wales. I had the other side of it. A beat. I'm not sure even I'd have called this, but..." He shrugged, an ordinary man's shrug, and the door swung shut behind him, and his footsteps faded down the corridor, and the noise that had come early and from the wrong direction simply, quietly, went away again, leaving the two of them alone in the long, low room with the artifacts humming, and the report lying between them, and the thing they had just done in front of a witness hanging unspoken in the air. "You told him," Hermione said. Her voice had gone strange. "You told him first." Draco was watching her carefully. "I only confirmed it. You opened the door, Hermione. Personal matter, not a breach. I just walked through it." A pause. The muscle in his jaw worked. "Was I wrong to? Tell me now if I was. I said quiet, and that wasn't quiet, and I'd understand if..." "No." She said it fast. She turned to face him fully, there in the office, with no shelf and no margin and no lantern between them, and she found that her hands were shaking and that she did not care. "No, you weren't wrong. That's the..." "God, Draco, that's exactly the thing, isn't it? You weren't wrong. I spent 4 days terrified of the noise, and the very first time it came, you stood next to me and put yourself between it and me without my having to ask, and you tried to take the whole weight of it onto your own ruined name, and I..." Her voice cracked. "Nobody's ever done that. Do you understand? Ron would have wanted us to face it together, which sounds the same but isn't. It means both of us in the fire. Harry would have made it about protecting me, which means me in a glass case while he stood in the fire alone. You did the third thing. You tried to stand in the fire so I didn't have to, and you did it without making it a gesture, without needing me to see it. You'd have done it whether I noticed or not." "Of course I would have." He looked genuinely puzzled, as though she were explaining water to a fish. "What else would I do? I watched my aunt carve a word into your arm on the floor of my house while I stood against the wall and did nothing. I have had 3 years to think about the man who would just stand against the wall. I'm trying very hard not to be him anymore. Stepping in front of Dawlish isn't bravery, Hermione. It's the absolute least I owe you. It doesn't begin to touch the debt." And there it was. The thing he had never said. The guilt he had carried for 3 years, not in melodramatic confessions, but in the long way round a room, and the careful margin of air, and the cold he wore like armour, laid finally bare in the plain office light, not as a performance, but as a simple, flat accounting. And she saw what it had cost him to be near her at all for 3 years. What the work itself had been. A daily penance, a daily standing in the room where the wall had been, a refusal to do the easy thing and look away. She crossed the small space between them, and she did not kiss him. She took his face in both her hands and made him look at her, and she said, very quietly and very fiercely, "It's not a debt. Do you hear me? I won't be a debt you spend the rest of your life paying off. I won't be your penance, Draco. If that's what this is, if some part of you wants me because wanting me feels like atoning, then we stop right now, today, before it goes any further, because I have been a great many things to a great many people, and I refuse to be your way of feeling less guilty about the worst day of my life." His hands came up and covered hers where they held his face. "It started as guilt," he said. He did not look away. He had stopped somewhere in the last week being able to look away from her, and she understood it was the most honest thing about him. "I won't lie to you, 'cause you'd know. 3 years ago, when they paired us, I thought, this is the punishment then. This is what I'm owed. To stand next to the person I helped ruin and feel it every day. I came to this office to be punished, Hermione. And then..." His jaw worked. "And then you turned out to be unbearable. You corrected my Latin, and you outpaced me on the warding genealogies that my own family bled into me. And you looked through me like I was glass exactly the way you did when we were 12. And the punishment stopped being a punishment somewhere around the first year and became the only part of my day He stopped, started again, lower. "It's not guilt anymore. The guilt's still there. It'll always be there. I'll carry that house around till I die. But it's not why. The why is that you are the most alive person I have ever stood next to, and standing next to you for 3 years taught me what cold I'd been living in before. That's not penance. That's the opposite of penance. Penance is what I'm meant to do here. You're what happened to me instead." The pipes ticked in the wall. The artifacts hummed. And Hermione Granger, holding the face of Draco Malfoy in both her hands in the plain light of the office where they had been cold to each other for 3 years, felt the last of the architecture come down. Not pushed this time, not broken in a storm, but simply, finally, set aside, because she no longer needed the thing it had been protecting her from. "All right," she whispered. "All right. Not a debt, not a penance. The opposite of penance." "The opposite of penance," he agreed, and turned his head and pressed his mouth to the heel of her palm, eyes still open, still on her, the way he'd kissed her knuckles underground. And she felt the warmth of it travel the length of her arm into the unsealed center of her, where there was, now, no cloth, no wall, nothing left to contain it at all. It should have ended there. It nearly did. They had crossed every distance, said every unsaid thing, survived the first noise, and come out the other side closer rather than broken. The fragile new thing had been tested and held, but the third crate was still in the vault in Bristol, unfinished, suspended, she had said, on grounds of gross incompetence. And on Wednesday, they went back to finish it, lighter now, easy with each other, in a way that still half astonished them both, reaching for the same quill on purpose, and letting their hands rest where they fell. And it was precisely because they were easy, because the careful vigilance of 3 years had finally relaxed, that neither of them was watching the coercion class object as closely as it needed to be watched when Hermione lifted it from its suppression cloth to log the final signature. And the thing, a thin silver torque, old as the house, designed across centuries to seize a will and bend it, woke in her bare hands and reached for the nearest mind it could find, which was hers, and her wand fell from her fingers and clattered to the cold stone floor, and her eyes went flat and distant and wrong, and she turned, slowly, with the live torque gripped in both white-knuckled hands, toward the man beside her. For one suspended heartbeat, Draco did not move, and in that heartbeat, the whole of his face changed. The easy warmth of the last days wiped clean away, replaced by something he had not worn since the war. A cold, terrible focus, the look of a man who has lived his whole life inside dark magic and knows precisely how fast it kills. "Hermione." His voice came out very quiet and very level, the levelness of a man holding panic by the throat. "Hermione, listen to me. Don't fight it. Do you hear me? Whatever it's telling you to do, don't fight it. Fighting it gives it purchase. It's a coercion class. It feeds on the struggle. Go limp. Let it think it's won." But the thing in her hands had already won, or thought it had. Her eyes found him, flat, distant, the warm, quick intelligence in them drowned under the talker's ancient will. And she raised her wand hand, except her wand was on the floor and her fingers were empty, and the talk, denied a weapon, did the next thing a coercion object does. It reached for the strongest fear in the mind it had seized and made her live inside it. She made a sound, a small broken sound, nothing like her, and her flat eyes filled suddenly with a terror that was not the talker's but her own, dragged up from the sealed place where she kept it. And Draco understood, with a lurch of horror, exactly which fear the thing had found, because he had been there. He had stood against the wall while it happened the first time. The drawing room, the floor, the word being carved into her arm. "No," he said. "No, not that. You don't get to give her that." He did not reach for his wand. There was no spell for this. A coercion talk could not be hexed off a victim without hexing the victim. Every warding genealogy his blood had taught him said the same. The only severance was the wearer's own will reasserting itself, and her will was 3 stories underground in a house in Wiltshire, reliving the worst hour of her life. So he did the thing the genealogies did not list. He crossed the space between them, close, closer than was safe, close enough that if she struck out with the live talk, it could take him too. And he did not try to wrest it from her hands, because force fed it. He took her face in both his hands, the way she had taken his in the office, and he pressed his forehead to hers, flat eyes to terrified flat eyes, and he spoke to her, low and steady and relentless, into the half-inch of charged air between them. "It's not real, Hermione. The room you're in isn't real. It's 3 years gone. It's a thing that already happened and already ended, and you already survived. You're not on that floor. You're in Bristol. You're in a cold vault with a useless coward who should have stopped it the first time and didn't, and who is not going to stand against the wall this time. Do you hear me? I'm right here. I'm not going anywhere. The thing in your hands is lying to you, and I am the only true thing in this room. Come back. Come back to me. Follow my voice out of that room and come back." Her flat eyes flickered. "That's it." His hands tightened on her face. His own pulse was hammering so hard he could hear it, but his voice did not shake, because the one thing he could give her was steadiness, and he gave it with everything he had. You know my voice. You've spent 3 years hating my voice. Hate it now if you have to. Be furious, be terrified, feel all of it, but feel it here, with me, not in that room. The talk wants you alone in the past. I am refusing to let you be alone. Come back, Granger. Come back, Hermione. Come back. And the name, both names, the cold one and the true one, the whole impossible history of them packed into the 2 words, reached down into the drowned place where the talk had her and gave her something to climb. Her breath hitched. Her flat eyes filled, focused, cleared, the warm, quick intelligence surging back up through the ancient drowning will. And with a wrenching cry that was entirely her own, entirely Hermione, she flung the silver talk away from herself across the vault, and it struck the stone wall and lay there, inert, its single chance spent, a dead thing again. Her knees gave. He caught her. They went down together onto the cold stone floor, his arms full of her, her whole body shaking, and he held her against his chest and said her name into her hair, over and over. Hermione, Hermione, I've got you. You're here, you're in Bristol, I've got you. And she clung to the front of his robes with both white-knuckled hands and shook and did not cry, because she was not, even now, a person who cried easily. She shook instead, the terror working its way out of her in long shudders, and he held her through every one of them and did not once let go. It was a long time before either of them spoke. The vault was very quiet. The dead talk lay against the wall. The charmed lantern burned its steady gold, witnessing as it had witnessed everything. And slowly the shaking eased, and her breathing steadied against his chest, and she became aware of the absurd specifics of where she was. Sitting on a cold stone floor 3 stories underground, in the arms of Draco Malfoy, who was rocking her very slightly, without seeming to know he was doing it, and murmuring her name into her hair as though it were the only word he had left. You didn't stand against the wall, she said. Her voice was wrecked, but it was hers. No. His arms tightened. Not this time. Not ever again. I'd sooner die than do that to you twice. She pulled back, just far enough to see his face, and what she saw there undid the last sealed thing in her, because he was looking at her with the full terror of the last 2 minutes, still raw and open on his features, all the careful coldness 3 years had taught him, stripped clean away. A man who had just watched the person he loved dragged into the worst hour of both their lives and had thrown himself bodily after her into it without a wand or a spell or a single thing to protect himself but his own voice. He had not stood against the wall. He had walked into the fire, and he had pulled her out. You could have died, she said, if it had taken me too, a coercion talk with 2 wills to bend. You didn't know it wouldn't reach for you. You came that close on purpose. You did the thing the genealogies say not to do. The genealogies, he said, can rot. A short, broken breath that was almost a laugh. I wasn't going to stand at a safe distance and shout helpful corrections while you drowned, Hermione. I've done the safe distance. I've done 3 years of safe distance. I'm an expert at it. It's the only thing my family ever taught me to do well. And it turns out..." His voice cracked finally, the steadiness he'd held for 2 minutes giving way all at once, now that the danger was past. "It turns out I would rather be inside the fire with you than safe anywhere without you. That's the whole of it. That's the thing I learned just now on this floor. There is no distance I can keep that's worth what keeping it costs. I'm done keeping distance. I'm done. I want to be inside everything with you, the good and the terrible, the candlelight and this, all of it, every fire, for as long as you'll have me, and I don't care that I've no right to want it. I'm so far past caring about my rights that I can't even see them from here." She kissed him. There on the cold stone floor, with the dead talk against the wall and the lantern burning steady and the terror still ebbing out of both their bodies in long, slow waves. She took his face in her shaking hands, and she kissed him with everything she had been holding back for 3 years and 4 days and 2 unbearable minutes. And it was not a dam breaking, and it was not a thing carefully built. It was a thing claimed, a flag planted in the deepest ground of her, a choice made not in a storm or a candlelit forgetting, but in the immediate aftermath of having nearly lost everything, which is the only place a choice ever truly gets made. "Yes," she said against his mouth when she could speak, "for as long as I'll have you, which is, Draco, listen to me, which is not a debt and not a penance and not a secret in the dark. It's the other thing, the plain light thing, the thing you asked for in the vault on Thursday. Yes, all of it, every fire." He made the sound she loved low in his chest and gathered her in, and they sat tangled together on the cold stone floor of the vault for a long time, neither willing to be the first to move, while the lantern burned down its gold and the dead talk lay forgotten, and the last of the fear dissolved into something else entirely, something warm, something that had no architecture around it anymore, because neither of them needed protecting from it now. They did finish the crate eventually. They had to. It was the job, and they were both, beneath everything, people who finished the job. But they finished it together, both hands on every object, Draco refusing to let her lift anything barehanded again, and Hermione, for once in her life, not arguing, letting someone do something for her, the way he'd told her to in Wales, by candlelight in another world. And when it was done, when the last signature was logged, and the crate sealed, and the vault closed behind them, they climbed the worn spiral stair into the Bristol evening hand in hand, openly, not caring who might be at the top of it. There was no one at the top of it. There rarely is, for the moments that matter. But they would not have let go, even if there had been, and they both knew it, and the knowing was its own quiet kind of vow. "Saturday," he said, in the grey alley behind the derelict house, the same alley where she'd planted the first reckless flag. "I want to take you somewhere that isn't a vault or an office or a haunted house in the middle of nowhere, somewhere with proper light and bad wine and absolutely no cursed objects. I want to court you, Hermione Granger, in the most tedious, ordinary way imaginable, in plain sight, like a person who isn't ashamed and isn't hiding and isn't paying off a debt. I want the boring version. I have never in my life wanted anything as much as I want the boring version of this with you." And she laughed, really laughed, the terror finally gone, the whole impossible, improbable wonder of it breaking over her at once. And she said yes, and she kissed him in the open grey light of the alley. And somewhere far above them, in the ordinary world that did not yet know what it was about to have to make room for, the lights of Bristol were coming on, one by one, against the falling dark. The noise came, in the end, the way Draco had always said it would, loud and from every direction, and entirely impossible to outrun. It came first from her own people, because that was where it would always hurt most. She told them herself. She would not have it any other way, would not let them learn it from a memo or a corridor rumour, or the sharp eye of a gossip columnist who'd seen the two of them at a candlelit table in a small, unfashionable restaurant on a Saturday with bad wine and no cursed objects. She sat Harry and Ron down in her own small flat, and she told them plainly in her own level voice, and she watched it land. Ron's face went through every colour it owned, and several it didn't. And he said a great many things, most of them loud, none of them entirely unfair. And one of them, the drawing room, Hermione, your arm, have you forgotten your own arm? Was the thing she had been most afraid of hearing said aloud, and she did not flinch from it. No, she said quietly. I haven't forgotten my arm. I'll never forget my arm. Neither will he. That's rather the point, Ron. He's the only person in my life who carries that day exactly as heavily as I do, who doesn't need it explained, who was there and has spent 3 years standing in the room where it happened on purpose because he couldn't forgive himself for standing against the wall. She pushed up her sleeve. She did not often show them the scar. She showed it now. He didn't give me this. He stood by while it was given, and he was 17 and a coward, and he knows it. And he has spent every day since trying to become a person who wouldn't. Last Wednesday, a coercion talk dragged me back into that exact room, and he threw himself into it after me, without a wand to pull me out. He could have died doing it. He did the thing he failed to do at 17. People can become better than they were. I have to believe that, Ron. I've built my whole adult life on the idea that the war doesn't get to be the last word on anybody, and either I meant it or I didn't. Harry, who had been quiet, said at last, "Is he good to you?" And it was the only question that mattered, and she answered it truthfully. And Harry nodded slowly, and that was the beginning of the thaw, though it was a long thaw and not a clean one, and Ron did not come round for the better part of a year, and when he finally did, it was grudging and incomplete and real. The noise came from his side too, though differently. Narcissa received the news in the cold formal drawing room of a townhouse that was not the manor. Draco had never taken Hermione to the manor, and never would. And she said nothing for a long moment, and then she looked at Hermione with the unreadable black eyes her son had inherited, and she said only, "You'll forgive me if I am not what you would call welcoming, but my son has not smiled since he was 16, and he came in this evening smiling, and I find I am not willing to be the thing that takes that away from him. We will not be friends, Miss Granger, but I will not be your enemy. That is a great deal more than I would have offered most people, and rather more than you, perhaps, expected." And it was. It was a great deal more than expected. And it would have to do. And over years it became, slowly something almost like respect. The papers came, of course. War heroine and Death Eater's son. The headlines wrote themselves, ugly and predictable, and for a few weeks the noise was very loud indeed. But they had not built the thing in the dark, and that turned out to be the whole of their armor. There was nothing to expose, because nothing was hidden. When a reporter shouted a cruel question across the ministry atrium, Draco did not take the long way round it. He stopped, and he took Hermione's hand in plain sight of the whole roaring lobby, and he said clearly, "Yes, I'm aware of what I was. So is she. Print whatever you like. She's already heard the worst of it from people who love her, and she chose this anyway, and your opinion weighs rather less with us than theirs did." And he walked her to the lift through the noise with her hand in his and his head up, and the photograph of it ran on a dozen front pages, and it was, the columnists agreed, very bad form, and it was also, Hermione thought, looking at it later, the most truthful photograph anyone had ever taken of either of them. The noise faded, as noise does. The world, it turned out, could be made to make room. Not graciously, not all at once, but it could be made to by two people who simply declined to go away, and declined to hide, and declined, above all, to be ashamed of a thing that had cost them so much to earn. A year on, almost to the day, a storm came in off the Irish Sea. It was not the same storm. Storms are not the same twice. But it had the same charged feeling to it, the same metallic ozone bite in the air that lifted the fine hairs along the forearm, the same green-black swelling of the sky. They felt it gathering all afternoon from the windows of the flat they now shared, a small bright place with proper light and no cursed objects, and a great many more books than the shelves could honestly hold. And when the storm finally broke over the city in the early evening, and the lights of the whole street guttered and died, an ordinary power cut, the Muggle kind, the grid overwhelmed, they did not reach for their wands. They reached, instead, in the sudden dark, for the drawer where they kept the candles. It had become a small private ritual between them, unspoken, the way the most important things between them had always been unspoken first, and only later given words. When a storm came, they let the lights stay out. They found the candles. They lit them one by one and set them about the room until the small space bloomed gold, and the gold relief threw their joined shadow huge and trembling against the wall of overflowing books. And they sat together in it, close, with the storm sealing the world away beyond the glass. And they remembered, without ever quite saying so, the night that had officially never happened, the night that had, in the end, happened more truly than anything in either of their lives before it. "Do you know," Hermione said, watching him light the last stub with the same careful ceremony he'd used in a vault in Wales a lifetime ago. "For a long time I told myself the candles were why, that if there'd been proper light that night, none of it would have happened, that it was the dark that did it, the strangeness, the way you can't quite believe a candlelit thing is real. And now," he set the candle down. The flame caught and steadied and lit his face from below, the planes of it gone soft and unguarded, the way they had gone soft and unguarded the very first time, across a foot of scarred oak in another world. "Now, I think the candles only let us see what was already there." She reached across the small gold space and took his hand, the pale, ringed one, laced her ink-stained fingers through his the way she had underground, the way she had on a cold stone floor with a dead talk against the wall. We'd been sitting across an office from each other in proper light for 3 years and seen nothing at all because the proper light was the thing we were hiding in. It took the dark to make us stop performing long enough to look. That's all the candles ever did. They didn't make the thing. They just stopped us pretending it wasn't there. He brought her hand to his mouth and pressed his lips to her knuckles, eyes open, fixed on hers, exactly as he had done in a vault on a Thursday that had changed both their lives. And she felt the warmth of it travel the whole length of her arm and into the center of her where there was, now, no cloth and no wall and no architecture, nothing to contain it and nothing left to protect, only the warmth itself, freely given, freely held. "Marry me," he said. He said it simply, in the candlelight, with the storm pressing against the glass. No ring produced with a flourish, though there was a ring, she would learn, an old one, his grandmother's, that he had been carrying in his coat for 3 weeks, waiting for the right dark and the right storm. No speech. He had learned over a year of plain light that the truest things between them needed the fewest words. He only held her hand against his mouth and looked at her over it with his whole unguarded face and said the 2 words and waited, and did not. She noticed and loved him for it as she had loved him for it in the vault, did not move to choose for her. He left it hers. He had always, after that first dawn, left it hers. "In plain light," she said. Her voice had gone unsteady. "Or by candlelight." "By candlelight," he said, "because it's a storm and we've no choice." And then, in the plainest, brightest, most tedious light imaginable, in front of everyone who ever said it couldn't happen, with Potter looking like he's swallowed a lemon, and my mother being icily polite to your parents, and Weasley sitting in the back row not entirely sure why he came. A breath. The flame stood steady between them. "Both, Hermione. That's the whole answer to everything you've ever been afraid of about us. Not the dark instead of the light. Both. The candlelight and the plain light. The thing we found in the storm and the thing we built in the open. I want all of it. I have wanted all of it since the moment you closed the last inch yourself in a haunted house in Wales and stopped pretending you didn't. And Hermione Granger, who had spent 3 years building a life she could survive and discovered in a single candlelit night that survival had never been the same thing as living, who had been so afraid of the cost that she had nearly never paid it, and had found in the paying that the thing was worth every coin and every column inch and every hard year of a friend coming slowly round, looked at the man across the small gold space, at the storm behind him and the candles around them and the overflowing books and the whole impossible, improbable life they had made in plain sight of a world that had sworn it could never be. And she did not say yes with words. She closed the last inch herself. She leaned across the candlelight and kissed him deliberately, with her eyes open until the very last moment, so that she could watch it land on him, watch the disbelief and the joy break over his unguarded face. And his hand came up into her hair, and the other closed hard around hers, and the candles burned steady and gold all around them, and the storm went on screaming against the glass as though it was somewhere very far away in another country, a thing that had nothing to do with the two of them at all. And this time, there was no dawn that could make it never have happened. There never would be again. They had built the thing in the light precisely so that no darkness could ever unmake it. And it held, and it went on holding, for all the plain, ordinary, tedious, wonderful years that followed. Every storm met with candles, every candle a small remembering, every plain, bright morning a thing chosen freely and again. Two people who had each seen behind the other's wall, and who had decided at last that the only thing worth doing with what they'd seen was to stop building walls altogether and live together in the light they'd finally stopped being afraid of. The candle burned down. He lit another without breaking from her, and outside, slowly, one by one, the lights of the whole city came back on against the dark.
So that's the end of today's story. Thank you for staying with me until the last candle burned down. I want to tell you why I wrote this one. I think we all build walls. We tell ourselves a story about a person and then we stop looking at them. It feels safe, but it isn't living. That's what this story is really about. Two people who hid from each other in a plain light for 3 years. It took a storm and one small candle to make them stop pretending. There is a line I keep thinking about. Hermione says the candle did not make the thing. They just stopped them pretending it wasn't there. I love that idea. Sometimes we don't need something new to happen. We just need to stop lying to ourselves about what is already there. And the other thing, Draco learns not to stand against the wall. He learns to walk into the fire. I wanted to write a love that is brave like that. Not perfect, just brave. Maybe you have a wall too. Maybe there is a true you kept in the dark. I hope in some small way this story makes you want to step into the light. Thank you for listening. Take care of yourself, and I will see you in the next story.